Welcome to this quick review of Period 9 for APUSH, roughly 1980 to the present. This is about 5% of the AP exam, and in this quick review, we'll hit the highlights of the things that you should know and understand. The big story of Period 9 is the ascendancy of the conservative movement. Conservatives had been growing in power since the 60s, discrediting the idea of big government. The idea that the federal government had spent too much money, had too much involvement in regulating capitalism, that it had involved itself in social welfare, and that the only way forward is to use tax cuts, deregulation, and cuts to the government's programs in order to restore government back to its smaller size. This is very Jeffersonian and kind of really harkens back to what Thomas Jefferson did when he took over from the Federalists, reduce the power of the government. The government is best, governs least. Many of the policies of the conservatives, the tax cuts and the deregulation, did in fact benefit the wealthier people in the United States. And historians have called this the great wealth transfer, where we see the poorest people lose ground under the conservatives and the wealthy gain in power and economic benefit. One area in which conservatives are not opposed to big government, that is, which they embrace big government, is the military. And we will see under Reagan pretty heavy spending on the United States' defense budgets. Another hallmark of the conservatives, especially religious conservatives, will be the argument that the social values of the past that come out of Christianity in particular are the most useful values in serving America's public interests, and this will lead conservatives to oppose abortion rights and try to overturn Roe v. Wade, as well as to oppose protections for LGBTQ+ peoples. During this time period, increasing migration from South and Latin America will also rile the conservatives, who will use xenophobic and attacks policies and attacks on immigrants to stir up their base of support, to argue that these migrants are taking jobs and that they are getting the advantage of being in the United States without contributing to it, and that they're also not adopting American culture or speaking the American language. English. One thing contributing to the power of these conservatives is the Sun Belt migration, which had begun earlier with the advent of air conditioning, allowing people to move to the warmer states, Texas, Florida, Arizona, New Mexico, and those states become powerhouses of support for conservatives, thus helping to cement the party shift where Republicans once were dominant in the North. They're going to become more dominant in the South, and Republicans will tend to be the party of conservatives in the 20th century, in this period in particular. A second theme of this Period 9 will be America's role in the rest of the world, starting with the vigorous anti-communism of President Reagan. It was an anti-communist policy aimed at using weapons and technology to intimidate the Soviets, as well as to prop up anti-communist regimes in places around the world. But the Soviets fall, and the ending of the Warsaw Pact and the Cold War by 1991 will bring around an end to this communist threat. But America does not withdraw then from the rest of the world. Peacekeeping efforts and humanitarian work in places like Bosnia-Herzegovina become more important as the U.S. changes its role to respond to other problems, such as dictatorial regimes that exist in these places in the world. The largest shift will be in 2001 as a result of Al-Qaeda's attack on the World Trade Center, the Pentagon. We will see the United States launch a war on terror, a never-ending war on terror, that will take the United States across the globe in search of terrorists to break up terrorist networks. Afghanistan is one of those places on the hunt for Osama bin Laden, the mastermind behind the 2001 September 11th attacks, but also Iraq, which will become one of the most criticized wars in U.S. history because of the dubious nature of how the United States got involved in that conflict in the search for weapons of mass destruction that apparently did not really exist. This has not stopped debates, however, about America's role in world affairs. And questions about America's peacekeeping role, as well as its promotion of democracy around the globe, remain. As the United States has tried to build democratic regimes in places like Iraq, it has shown many people around the world that the efforts to do so are not always successful. America's role in torturing people in search for information about terrorism also led to questions about U.S. integrity during this war on terror under President Bush, the second Bush. And it raised questions about civil liberties and human rights in the United States and abroad. As the U.S. chased down terrorists around the globe, it adapted to new technologies, tracking resources and banking, the spread of information via the internet, which has led to investigations of people's online behavior, and especially under the Patriot Act, looking at such things as what people check out from libraries, has raised questions about the rights that we may be giving up in order to search for and disrupt these global terror networks. Part of the story of Period 9 has also been the increasingly globalized economy in which the United States is inextricably linked, which is not to say that the U.S. hasn't been linked before. Trade has been a part of American linkage to the world since the beginning, but with corporations operating in a global environment where they may have a hub in the United States, but also in China, branches in India, workers in South America, has meant that the United States' economic role in other places has become much more complicated in the past. This has meant that there are debates about the global environment and pollution as companies are able to spread across the globe and skirt environmental regulations that would be operating in the United States, as well as debates about free trade and whether or not we should bring down or lower barriers or blockages to markets around the globe. An illustration of free trade debates that has continued to echo today would be NAFTA, which was signed under President Clinton and then modified under President Trump. As all of this global marketplace has accelerated, the United States itself has seen a decline in manufacturing and therefore a loss in manufacturing jobs, as corporations move to find cheaper labor across the globe. So your shirts will not be made by some proud worker in the United States, your car not made by some proud worker in the United States, but increasingly by someone else, paid a lower wage because the cost of labor can be cheaper elsewhere. This has undermined unions inside the United States and undermined the labor movement in general, which has then also widened the gap between the rich and the poor. As labor market has shifted away from manufacturing and heavy manual labor, more and more Americans work in white-collar and service jobs. So they provide services, business services, financial services, consumer services, as well as working as lawyers and doctors. That has not eliminated the need, though, for manual labor. And much of that work in agriculture and business, construction, for example, has been provided by migrants to the United States who have seen opportunities for jobs by moving to the US and taking those positions vacated by white workers as more and more of them are engaged in service work and white-collar work. And this global economy has been helped by conservative pro-business policies. Anti-union policies, anti-labor policies by conservatives have benefited businesses and increased the size and global reach of American corporations over the last 30 years. All of this would not have been possible without changes in technology, especially in telecommunications. The advent of cell phones and internet technology enabled Americans to work and play across the globe, to keep in touch and to communicate, to do business, even as they travel, so that businesses do not have to be limited to the telephone and the fax machines of the past. So the speed and pace of global business has certainly been helped by the advent of internet technology. Internet technology has also increased the amount of social networks that have linked Americans and others across the globe to each other via Facebook and Twitter and other social media platforms, leading to questions about these media platforms sharing of information, but also disinformation and misinformation, as these social networks can be corrupted and disrupted by people seeking to influence public opinion. There's been a lot of exploration of alternate sources of energy in the United States in order to promote energy independence. This has come from both a desire to not be dependent on fossil fuels, as those are limited in supply and will not last forever, but also from an environmental point of view to create clean or green energy that will enable the United States to be successfully independent without destroying the environment. Technology and science has advanced, but not without controversy, as science and public policies have, about science and technology, have adapted to the new things that we're able to do with the internet in health and medicine. That hasn't meant that there's wide agreement between conservatives and liberals about those policies and what the science means and how the science can be used in the interest of us all. That has been a look at period 9 in 4 short slides. So keep in mind, conservatives, one theme, the expansion of the US's role in the world with the fall of communism, war on terror, the economic expansion or globalization of the US economy, and then technology is the 4th theme of this era.